Дами и господа, сега следва лекция, която със сигурност има потенциал да направи много заглавия, не само в българските медии, а и в цяла Европа. На сцената излиза водещ експерт, който беше в центъра на едно от най-тежките изпитания за европейската икономика през последните години. Бивш генерален директор по енергийна сигурност в Германското министерство на икономиката, с над 20 години опит в публичната политика и управлението на кризи. В ролята си той участва пряко в реакцията на Германия през 2022, когато прекъснаха руските газови доставки. Днес е старши съветник в Boston Consulting Group и е FGC Global. Работи по въпросите на енергийната и икономическа сигурност в глобален контекст. Аз разговарях с него в неделя и едно от основните послания от този разговор, това, което видях поне, колегите от другите медии, които бяха цитирали, той ми каза: високите цени на енергията са тук, за да останат. Аплодисменти и за Филип Щайнберг. It's very nice to meet you, personally.
Glad to meet you again.
Yeah. Okay, the floor is yours. You can tell us again that the prices in energy, the high prices, are here to stay.
Hopefully so.
Yeah, okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure of being here. Lunch is approaching, but before lunch we're going to get some other energy, some more intellectual energy. I'm going to walk you through a little journey, how Europe's path might look like to become stronger and less vulnerable. Ladies and gentlemen, in August 2022, I was responsible for energy security in the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. And you know, on the 31st of August 2022, Russia stopped the delivering gas through Nord Stream. Germany at the time received 55% of its natural gas from Russia through Nord Stream. And so the only thing we did in the ministry was actually to do everything to prevent a gas shortage happening in Germany. And you know what a gas shortage might have looked like in Germany: curtailment of industry and serious consequences for consumers. So what did we do? What did the ministry do? We actually chartered LNG carriers on the world market within weeks. We built 4 floating gas terminals, FSRU terminals, within less than 12 months. Permitting and construction within less than 12 months. In a country like Germany, where a normal permit for a wind turbine takes up to 7 years. And the coalition government in power at the time, the so-called traffic coalition, actually overcame their ideological differences. The Greens actually, we put on gas power plants and oil power plants on the grid again, old ones. We prolonged actually nuclear power plant running hours, and at the same time, the Liberals actually granted the necessary financing for that. That was the crisis of 2022. We are still recovering from it. Having not fully recovered, now we face the second energy crisis. In this century, or in this time of poly crisis, the second energy crisis is, of course, the Iran crisis, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of LNG and of crude oil, passes through the Strait of Hormuz. 20% for Europe, that's maybe not so much, but you have seen what's happening on the world energy markets, and so the markets are in turmoil. And then we see a third event happening. We see US transactionalism emerging on the scene, energy transactionalism. We know US transactionalism in other areas, but those 3 crises, they converge, they come together, and they change the energy world, I would believe, maybe not forever, but for a very long time. And what is the consequence out of this? The consequence, in my opinion, and I believe the German government is closely following this, and the European Union as well, the era of optimizing for efficiency is over. We need to think about resilience. What about Bulgaria? Bulgaria, you have actually really achieved a lot. You have achieved gas independence, you have achieved oil independence, and you have invested in Alexandropolis FSRU. This is really an achievement. It makes you more resilient, and that's what it's all about in this new energy world. Yes, there are a few challenges still ahead. The Turk Stream, the Balkan Stream, a problem, how to deal with it, and the possible gas corridor. This is something which is a possibility, I believe. You hold the key to Turk Stream and to the vertical gas corridor. Use it wisely. What we are seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is, of course, now immediate effects, immediate price effects, which are important and which affect all consumers. We also see, of course, medium-term effects, which will probably mean there will be no return to a pre-crisis equilibrium. And there will be no easy workarounds. Yes, of course, governments are trying to find workarounds. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates bypass. Options are there, but they are limited in size. And most importantly, markets will price in geopolitical risk. Prices remain high, very likely. Most importantly, and this is what I'm talking about today, is what is going to be the long-term impact. Will we see a different energy system, more resilient, probably greener, more based on electrons? This is the big question. My central thesis would be, yes, this is where we need to get to. But how do we need to get there? If we look at this slide, we see skeptical views. Skeptical views towards what? Towards actually making the energy system more efficient, more resilient, using electrons. And here you can see Daniel Yergin, an eminent US economist and CEO of CERAWeek. He actually is one of those being skeptical, saying, listen, we can expand renewables, electrons, that they might actually make the system more decentral and more resilient. But what we have seen up to now is that we have actually increased fossil energy and renewable energy. So there is energy addition and not transformation. You can see, if you look at the right-hand side, that the trend is reversing. And what we need to do, that would be my central thesis. We need more electrons, but there will be more fossils for a certain time. Therefore, addition must become substitution. And that needs molecular infrastructure, because more than 70% of global primary energy consumption is still based on molecules. And ladies and gentlemen, we talk very often about the energy transition, which is a very good thing. Now in terms of resilience, as I am doing today. But we tend to forget that electricity consumption only accounts for roughly 20% of today's final energy consumption. So it is very important to bear that in mind, that we need to focus also on molecules and how to deal with them to become more resilient. This is the map of infrastructure, of molecular infrastructure. And it follows from what I've said. If 70% of total end energy still comes from molecules, we do have a molecular infrastructure in Europe. And ladies and gentlemen, my point would be to say this is a good thing. This is a good thing that we have this very, very granular modular infrastructure based out of pipelines, where we receive our natural gas from 120 BCM billion cubic meters from Norway, 20 from Algeria, from Azerbaijan, and of course there is the Benelux pipeline system as well coming into Europe. That's a good thing, because also Pipelines, gas and hydrogen pipelines, are 5 to 10 times cheaper than high voltage direct current lines. This is something which is sometimes overlooked, and this is not to argue, of course, that we should do everything with pipelines and we should concentrate on fossils, on molecules. But of course, this is an argument, and here as well, we need to diversify, we need the right infrastructure mix, because we have this pipeline system. It can be transformed. Gas pipelines can be transformed in hydrogen pipelines. They are 5 to 10 times more cheaper than electricity lines. So a pipeline is not just an energy asset, it's an efficient, large-scale energy transport technology. How does the supply map look like today and in the future? And remember, our task is what we need to do. We need, after this, the triple shock, the Russian war on Ukraine, the Iran crisis, the Strait Hormone crisis still going on, and US energy transactionalism, we need to look at the supply map and see how we can develop it further. Yes, we have our stable anchors, Norway, gas and possible hydrogen. We have Qatar, of course, as an LNG provider. United States provide 35 to 45% of European LNG. That is a lot, but I've shown you the figures. Most comes through pipelines from Norway, from Azerbaijan, and that's a good thing. That's a strength that we need US LNG, maybe a bit not only as top-up quantities, but we don't use it as a base load. And of course, we have Algeria, which is expanding. There are growth corridors, Nigeria, North Africa, possibly the vertical gas corridor if Bulgaria decides for it. And of course, we have possibilities actually to increase sizes, volumes coming from Azerbaijan. But they are the wild cards, of course. We don't know how Iran, Strait of Hormuz crisis is going to end up. And we all know, once again, even if a ceasefire will be reached, even if a peace agreement will be there, the energy world will not be the same again. There are plans from building pipelines from Basra through Iraq, which might see the light of the day. And of course, there is still Russia and the residual risk we are facing here, and the decisions which are still to be taken in view of the 27 EU ban concerning gas coming into the EU. So what does this lead to? Where do those supply corridors lead us to? They lead us to the development, and this is what European leaders are doing. This is what is being done in Brussels, in Berlin, and I believe also in Sofia. We need a stable, real security of supply architecture, consisting of infrastructure, redundant infrastructure, pipelines, terminals. We need strategic reserves for oil, but also for gas. We need joint procurement, joint EU procurement. We have aggregate EU, but that needs to be transformed. This needs to be developed into a real joint procurement platform, and we need long-term contract. And of course, all that has to happen in a European concert, in a European framework. If we have this, then we will be prepared for crisis, and we really need to work on it. I've said that today's world is a molecular world, mainly natural gas. And this needs to be transformed. It needs to be transformed first into electrons. Everything, once again, needs to be electrified that can. Why? Because efficiency is much higher and energy is much higher. Electricity can be produced cheaply. Renewables are by nature cheap. Marginal costs are zero. Yes, infrastructure is costly, but at the end, renewables are cheap. But we cannot transform everything into electrons. Therefore, we need to actually also transform the molecular world. Biomethane might be a real alternative. Chemically, it's CH4. It's the same chemical structure as natural gas, but it, of course, has a much better footprint, and it is much more resilient because it can be produced decentrally in Europe, possibly in Ukraine. So I would argue, let's have a stronger focus on biomethane that can also benefit Ukraine, and it will make us more resilient because it's a decentralized form of energy. But of course, ladies and gentlemen, we also need Hydrogen. Hydrogen, there used to be a certain hype. Like 2-3 years ago, everybody talked about hydrogen. Some seem to want to drink their hydrogen for breakfast, actually, in order to energize themselves. This has slowed down, this euphoria. What is probably a good thing. It would not be good if this would collapse totally. You know that EU goals are very high, 10 million tons by 2030 and 20 million tons by 2045. Those were the EU goals. They are very ambitious. They are probably too ambitious. And you can see here on the left-hand side, all those funny-looking diagrams are just different estimations just for Germany, how much hydrogen we might need. And you see more or less all opinions you can imagine. My take would be, even if the European Union numbers, 10 or 20 million tons, 20 million tons is almost 700 terawatts of energy. If this will not be reached, we will need hydrogen in sizable quantities in order to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors and, once again, ladies and gentlemen, to become independent of fossil imports. Because hydrogen can be produced locally in our European countries, or at least in the vicinity of Europe. And that's a real strength. But there's one problem, of course. And this is why the whole hydrogen hype actually is slowing down and where we are facing the problems. Of course, hydrogen is very expensive. If we look at green hydrogen today, and those are average prices, I think they are rather on the lower end, we see up to 8 euros per kilogram of green hydrogen. If you compare that to natural gas, which is less than €1 per kilogram, then you see the cost difference. And that is a real challenge, of course. But ladies and gentlemen, when we started with the energy transition, with wind and solar, there were prices of 40 to 60 cents per kilowatt hour. Today we are down to 4 to 6 euro cents per kilowatt hour. So a massive decrease. And here, if we scale hydrogen, we are likely to see also a decrease. Maybe not as massive, but this is something we should expect if the right support mechanisms are there. Yes, we need a framework. Of course, we need, I would argue, like a flexible, functional emission trading system, so CO2 pricing systems, which still guide politicians and the business community. But we also need, of course, support mechanisms like contracts for difference proposed by the EU, where basically the cost gap is being covered by the state. We can also use green gas quotas, specified green gas quotas, where we say we need a certain amount of the molecules in the system need to become from green molecules. We can use lead markets and other instruments. We should actually invest in it, because it's investment not only in the decarbonized future, it is also investment in a more resilient energy world. Ladies and gentlemen, just let me give you one example. I don't want to go too much into Germany here. But this is what is Germany doing in terms of hydrogen infrastructure. Because when we talked to entrepreneurs, to the business community, they always told us, we cannot make FIDs, we cannot make investment decisions because there will be no infrastructure. How can we be sure there's infrastructure? Therefore, a couple of years ago, Robert Habeck asked me, please come up with an idea what we can do. And we developed this hydrogen core network, which will be up to 9,000 kilometers, 20 billion euros cost, which is, if you compare it, 20 billion, that's a sizable amount of money. If you compare it to electricity infrastructure, the modernization of the German electricity infrastructure costs 160 billion euros. So it's much more. And so that shows that greening, making the molecular world more resilient, can be done. And you can see that the capacity here, this is really sizable. We have constructed in a way that is flexible, so we can actually adapt it also to demand changes. And here you see the bigger European picture. Because hydrogen, as I said, will need to be, the advantage is that hydrogen can be produced more or less locally. In Germany and in Europe, Central Europe, we believe 1/3 of the hydrogen can be produced locally. But 2/3 will have to be imported. And so the European Union, together with the German government and adjacent governments, are working on import corridors, actually to bring hydrogen into Central Europe through different routes. I don't believe all of those will actually come live, but they give you a feeling of what is being done and what is actually in the process of making. And some of those corridors, especially the corridor from Denmark, actually is seeing live. And concerning financing, the German core network, we have financed it privately. It is financed by levies, by fees of the contributors. It is just backed up by a government guarantee, and we have actually kind of equaled it out over time. So that is called an intertemporal cost allocation mechanism. So basically, we have said we take the average price over time, and therefore it's cheaper in the beginning. Otherwise, it would be prohibitively high. This could be applied also to this corridors, to this import corridors. One area you would probably not think about is defense. Defense is one of the sectors which is driving the transition, the molecular transition as well, not because of climate goals primarily, but to become more resilient because, of course, biomethane, hydrogen, it can be produced locally, decentralized, and that's an asset for the defense sector. And ladies and gentlemen, of course, if you talk about energy, we have to talk about nuclear in these times, especially, of course, after the COP28 pledge, where 22 countries committed to tripling nuclear capacity by 2050. What do we make out of this? And I understand that there's a debate in this country as well about nuclear and what should be done. I don't want to recommend anything. I just want to hint to the fact that, of course, we do see this renaissance, but it's largely a renaissance which is political now. If we look at the reality, of course, we see that Hinkley Point was projected at 18 billion, now it's 35 billion euros, 7 years delay. Flamanville, it's more or less the same thing. So the traditional reactors, pressurized or boiling water reactors, they are very expensive. Of course, there are other technologies, the famous SMRs. Katharina Reiche, the economics minister, is very in favor of it. And they might be the future. But there are 50 different kinds of it that will probably not be operational by tomorrow. And the same holds true for fusion. I'm advising fusion startups, and that's great. They have an amazing story, and they believe in it, and that's great. And we should actually do everything to have it. But it's probably no quick fix to become energy independent, to become energy resilient. So my takeaway would be nuclear might have a real future, but it's not an answer for the next decade. It is something which will be an add-on, and it should not prevent us now from doing our homework. That means electrifying everything that's possible and greening, making the molecular world more resilient. What does it end up to? Ladies and gentlemen, energy is being compartmentalized a lot. People talk about electrons and the electric system, the market order, market design of electrons. There are people talking about hydrogen, biomethane, gas, but we need to actually bring it together in a systemic view. And this is really something which is very important, because if we actually get our basics right, what is the structure of the energy system, the analysis right, then we can integrate it. And then we can use circular energy to produce hydrogen in for off-peak situations. And this is something we need to do using AI, using the methods we have today, because of course this decentralized, integrated energy system, which is more resilient, but it is more complex as well. That is for sure. What is the conclusion of what I just tried to explain to you? Resilience is the new efficiency. We have to stop to only maximize for efficiency, but have a real security of supply plan a real resilience roadmap. The European Union and Germany are working on a resilience roadmap, and this is what we really definitely need to do, because of course resilience comes with a price tag. It is not for free. But ladies and gentlemen, there is no free lunch. Every energy system has its price, and to go back to the good old times will not work because of climate reasons, but also, as we see it, because of the fragility of the new international energy system. So we need to decentralize, we need to become more resilient, and we need to have a public debate, but we are ready to pay for it. Second takeaway, and this is really something I keep on repeating on panels and in my advice, the molecule transition deserves the same political ambition as the electricity transition. Because once again, we focus very much on the electricity markets, on the traditional electricity market design, and more than 70% of primary energy, and that holds true for end energy as of today as well, is based on molecules. There are options how to make this molecular system more resilient, energy infrastructure-wise, but also how to boost green gases with green gas quotas, lead markets with clever financing mechanisms for the infrastructure with a stable regulatory environment. And last but not least, energy infrastructure is sovereignty infrastructure. We need to bear that in mind and make it a reality. The world runs on molecules for the transition and well beyond. If we manage to create a systemically integrated energy system, which actually has this in mind, which tries to electrify everything that's possible because of efficiency reasons, but also bearing in mind the relevance of molecules, they will not disappear very soon. Then we will become more resilient, and the energy system we see will be an energy system for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention.